The entire pharmacy fell silent. A 12-year-old boy stood at the counter with shaking hands, counting the last of his crumpled bills and coins. $38. $2 short. Behind him, a wealthy man in an expensive navy suit laughed loudly enough for everyone in the store to hear. "See," the man said with a smug grin. "I told you. Pocket change." The boy's face turned red with embarrassment. He slowly began gathering the money back into his worn envelope, preparing to walk away without the medicine his sick mother desperately needed. But what happened next shocked everyone in the room. Because just seconds later, the very man who mocked him would be staring at that same boy in complete disbelief, and realizing he had made a terrible mistake. A mistake he would regret for the rest of his life. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, we have to go back to where this story truly began. And it started with a quiet 12-year-old boy named Noah Bennett. The afternoon sun hung low over the quiet streets of Maplewood. It was the kind of small American town where people waved to their neighbors and kids rode bicycles down tree-lined sidewalks. But for Noah Bennett, life in Maplewood had never felt easy. At just 12 years old, Noah carried responsibilities far heavier than most adults. His mother, Emily Bennett, had been sick for nearly a year. What started as constant exhaustion had slowly turned into something much worse. Hospital visits became frequent. Doctor appointments filled their calendar, and medical bills piled up faster than they could pay them. Emily had always worked hard as a waitress at a small diner downtown. She never complained about long shifts or aching feet. But eventually, her illness forced her to stop working. That meant the small apartment they lived in depended on whatever little savings she had left, which wasn't much. Still, Emily tried to hide her worries from Noah. Every night she forced a smile and told him everything would be okay. But Noah wasn't a little kid anymore. He could see the truth. He saw the unpaid bills on the kitchen table. He noticed how the refrigerator was getting emptier each week. And he definitely noticed when his mother started skipping meals, pretending she wasn't hungry. That was the moment Noah made a quiet decision. If life wasn't going to be fair, then he would find a way to help anyway. So Noah began doing whatever small jobs he could around the neighborhood. He helped Mrs. Carter carry groceries. He mowed lawns for elderly neighbors. Sometimes he collected bottles and cans from public parks just to return them for a few extra cents. Most people barely noticed the skinny boy walking around with a plastic bag full of recyclables. But to Noah, every coin mattered. Every dollar meant he could help his mom. And then one afternoon, during a visit to the pharmacy with Emily, Noah overheard something that changed everything. The pharmacist mentioned a medication Emily needed. A medication that their insurance wouldn't fully cover. The price was $40. It might not sound like much to most people, but for Noah, it might as well have been 1,000. Still, Noah didn't give up. He started saving every dollar he earned. He skipped school lunches sometimes so he could keep the cafeteria money. He even sold his favorite baseball card collection online for a few extra dollars. Slowly, week by week, month by month, the envelope hidden under his mattress began filling with crumpled bills and loose coins. Until finally, 6 months later, Noah counted the money one last time. $38. $2 short. But it was close enough. Or at least he hoped it was. That afternoon, Noah slipped the envelope into his hoodie pocket and walked toward Whitmore Pharmacy. He didn't tell his mom where he was going. He wanted it to be a surprise. In his mind, he imagined handing her the medicine and seeing her smile again. And that thought alone made every step worth it. But Noah had no idea that when he pushed open the doors of that pharmacy, his life was about to collide with someone who couldn't have been more different from him. A man named Victor Langford. And that meeting would change everything. Whitmore Pharmacy was brighter than Noah expected. The polished white floor reflected the overhead lights, making the entire place feel almost too clean, too perfect. Noah hesitated just inside the entrance, clutching the worn envelope in his hands. For a moment, he considered turning around. Maybe he should wait until he had the full $40. Maybe he could find another job tomorrow. But then he thought about his mother lying on the couch at home, too tired to even sit up. And suddenly turning back wasn't an option anymore. He took a deep breath and walked toward the counter. Standing there, impatiently tapping his fingers against the glass surface, was Victor Langford. Victor was the kind of man people noticed the moment he walked into a room. His navy suit was perfectly tailored. His shoes were polished so brightly they reflected the ceiling lights. A gold watch wrapped around his wrist, and his posture carried the unmistakable confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime being respected or feared. Victor checked his watch again and sighed loudly. "This is unbelievable," he said, clearly irritated. The pharmacist, a middle-aged woman named Clara, gave him an apologetic smile. "I'm very sorry for the delay, Mr. Langford. Your prescription will be ready in just a moment." Victor shook his head. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. I don't have time to stand around all day." Noah quietly stepped behind him in line. He tried to stay small, hoping no one would notice him. But Victor noticed immediately. His eyes scanned the boy from head to toe. The oversized hoodie, the worn sneakers, the nervous posture. Victor's lips curled into a smirk. "Well, look at this," he said loudly. Noah froze. Victor turned slightly, making sure everyone nearby could hear him. "Kid," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "this isn't a charity line." A few customers glanced over. Noah lowered his head. "I just need to buy medicine," he said softly. Victor chuckled. "With what exactly?" he asked. Noah didn't respond. Victor leaned closer. "Pocket change." Some customers shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Victor seemed to enjoy the attention. "You know," he continued, "pharmacies usually expect people to actually pay for things." Noah felt heat rush to his face. But he stayed quiet, because arguing wouldn't help his mom. And that was all that mattered. Finally, Clara returned to the counter holding a small white box. "Here you go, Mr. Langford." Victor nodded and slid his sleek black credit card across the counter. The payment went through instantly. As Victor picked up his prescription, he glanced back at Noah one more time. "You might want to try the donation box down the street," he said with a smug smile. A woman standing nearby frowned slightly. But Victor didn't seem to care. He stepped aside, preparing to leave. Now it was Noah's turn. Clara looked down at him kindly. "How can I help you, sweetie?" Noah slowly opened the envelope and placed the wrinkled bills and coins onto the counter. "I need the medication for Emily Bennett." Clara checked the computer. "Yes, we have that ready." She scanned the box. The register beeped. Then she looked up. "The total is $40. Noah began counting the money carefully. 10, 20, 30, 35, 38. His stomach sank. He looked up nervously. "I only have 38. Clara hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "The system won't allow me to lower the price." Behind him, Victor paused near the door. He was listening. A smug smile slowly returned to his face. "I guess charity cases don't always work out," he muttered. Noah gathered the money back into the envelope. His chest felt tight. $2. That was all he needed. But right now, it felt impossible. He slowly turned away from the counter. And that's when something unexpected happened. As Noah walked toward the door, he noticed an elderly man standing near the pharmacy shelves. The man was struggling to reach a bottle on the top rack. His hands trembled slightly as he stretched upward. The bottle slipped. It fell to the floor and rolled beneath the shelf. The elderly man sighed. "On my back won't let me bend like that anymore," he muttered. Noah stopped. He could have kept walking. He could have gone home disappointed. But something inside him wouldn't let him ignore the man. So Noah knelt down and reached under the shelf. After a moment, he pulled the bottle out and handed it to him. "Here you go, sir." The elderly man smiled warmly. "Well, thank you, young man." Noah nodded politely. "It's no problem." He turned toward the door again, preparing to leave. But what happened next surprised everyone in the store. The elderly man walked to the counter and placed the bottle down beside Noah's medication. Then he looked at Clara. "I'll take care of the rest." Clara blinked. "You mean?" "The $2 he's missing," the man said. Noah's eyes widened. "You don't have to do that," he said quickly. The man smiled. "Kindness deserves kindness." Clara processed the payment. The register beeped. Then she handed Noah the medication. For a moment, Noah just stared at the box. After 6 months of saving, after all the worry, he finally had it. His voice shook. "Thank you." But the moment wasn't over yet. Because Victor Langford had been watching the entire thing. And suddenly, he wasn't smiling anymore. In fact, something about the elderly man had caught his attention. Something strangely familiar. And what Victor was about to realize would completely change everything. For a brief moment, the pharmacy returned to its quiet routine. Customers picked up prescriptions. The register beeped softly. Bottles rattled faintly behind the counter as Clara organized medications on the shelves. But Victor Langford hadn't left. He stood near the entrance, one hand resting on the glass door, staring back toward the counter. At first, he told himself it didn't matter. It was just an old man helping a kid. Nothing special. But the more Victor looked at the elderly stranger standing beside Noah, the more something about him felt strangely familiar. The man was tall, though age had curved his shoulders slightly. His silver hair was neatly combed back, and his posture carried a quiet dignity that seemed out of place in the small pharmacy. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Where have I seen him before?" he murmured. Meanwhile, Noah carefully held the small white box of medicine as if it were made of glass. He turned to the elderly man. "Thank you again," Noah said softly. The man smiled kindly. "You're very welcome, young man." Noah hesitated before speaking again. "My mom is going to feel better now." The elderly man nodded. "I'm sure she will." Noah began walking toward the door. But before he reached it, the elderly man spoke again. "Wait a moment." Noah turned around. "Yes, sir?" The man studied him for a second. "You helped me when you didn't have to," he said, "even though you were already dealing with your own problems." Noah shrugged slightly. "You needed help." The elderly man chuckled softly. "That's a rare answer these days." Victor listened from across the room, growing more curious by the second. The old man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small card. He handed it to Noah. "If your mother ever needs additional help, you can contact me." Noah looked down at the card, but didn't fully understand what he was reading. It was simply a name and a phone number. He nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." But just as Noah slipped the card into his pocket, Victor suddenly walked back toward the counter. His confident stride returned, though his expression had changed slightly. "Excuse me," Victor said, addressing the elderly man. The man turned calmly. "Yes." Victor studied his face more closely now, and suddenly his eyes widened. It hit him, like a memory snapping into place. "Wait," Victor said slowly. The pharmacy grew quiet again. Victor's voice sounded less confident now. You're Mr. Harrison, aren't you?" Several customers looked up. The elderly man tilted his head slightly. "I am." Victor swallowed. His posture straightened instantly. "Robert Harrison?" "Yes." Victor's confident smirk had completely vanished. Now he looked nervous. In fact, almost intimidated. Because Robert Harrison wasn't just any elderly man. He was one of the most respected philanthropists in the state. A retired businessman who had built several successful companies and donated millions to hospitals, schools, and community programs. Victor had seen his face in newspapers before. Everyone in the business world knew his name. Robert Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Do I know you?" Victor quickly forced a polite smile. "Victor Langford, CEO of Langford Financial." Robert nodded slightly. "Oh." Victor chuckled nervously. "I didn't realize you were here." Robert glanced toward the door where Noah had just left. "I was just helping a young man." Victor nodded quickly. Yes, I saw that." There was an awkward pause. Victor cleared his throat. "Well, I suppose that was generous of you." Robert's eyes shifted back toward Victor. "And you?" Victor blinked. "What about me?" Robert's expression remained calm. "I heard the way you spoke to that boy earlier." The words hung heavily in the air. Several customers quietly watched. Victor forced a laugh. "Oh, that," he said quickly. "Just a harmless joke." Robert didn't laugh. In fact, his face grew serious. "A joke?" Victor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, I mean." Robert folded his hands calmly. "That boy spent 6 months saving money to help his sick mother." Victor froze. "How do you know that?" he asked. Robert gestured toward Clara. "She told me." Victor glanced at the pharmacist, who nodded. Robert continued speaking quietly. And despite being $2 short, he still stopped to help a stranger. Victor looked toward the door again. But Noah was already gone. Robert's voice remained calm, but his words carried weight. "Tell me something, Mr. Langford." Victor swallowed. "Yes." "When was the last time you helped someone who had nothing to offer you in return?" Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. Because the truth was, he couldn't remember. And suddenly the confident businessman who had mocked a child just minutes earlier felt smaller than he had in years. But what Victor didn't realize yet was that this moment wasn't the biggest surprise of the day, because the real twist was about to happen, and it would completely change how everyone in that pharmacy saw Noah Bennett. Victor Langford stood frozen in the middle of Whitmore Pharmacy. The confident businessman who had walked in minutes earlier now looked strangely uneasy. Robert Harrison's question still hung in the air. "When was the last time you helped someone who had nothing to offer you in return?" Victor forced a small laugh, trying to recover his composure. "Well, you know how business is," he said, adjusting the sleeve of his expensive suit. Everyone's busy. Robert studied him quietly. The silence made Victor uncomfortable. But before Victor could say anything else, Clara suddenly looked up from the computer behind the counter. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly. "That's strange," she murmured. Robert glanced at her. "What is it?" Clara turned the monitor slightly so she could read it better. "This prescription for Emily Bennett," she said slowly. Victor barely paid attention, but Robert listened carefully. "Yes?" he asked. Clara leaned closer to the screen. "It says the medication was originally prescribed by Dr. Daniel Brooks." Robert's expression changed instantly. "Daniel Brooks?" he repeated. Clara nodded. "Yes." Robert looked thoughtful for a moment. Then he turned back toward the door where Noah had exited just moments earlier. "Did you say the boy's last name was Bennett?" he asked. Clara nodded again. "Yes. Noah Bennett." Robert's eyes widened slightly. "That can't be a coincidence," he murmured. Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" Robert didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly toward the door and looked out through the glass. Across the street, Noah was already halfway down the sidewalk, clutching the medicine carefully in his hands. Robert turned back toward Clara. "How long has Emily Bennett been a patient here?" Clara checked the computer. "About 8 months." Robert's face grew serious. "Do you know what she does for work?" "She used to work at the Maple Street Diner," Clara said. "But she had to stop because of her illness." Robert inhaled slowly. Victor crossed his arms impatiently. "I don't see what any of this has to do with me," he said. Robert turned to him calmly. "It might have everything to do with you." Victor frowned. "What are you talking about?" Robert looked toward the door again. Then he spoke quietly. "About a year ago, my grandson was in a car accident." Victor blinked. "I'm sorry to hear that." Robert nodded. "He survived, but the hospital bills were enormous." Victor shrugged slightly. "That happens." Robert continued. "At the time, my grandson didn't want me paying for everything. He insisted on working part-time while recovering." Victor remained silent. "He took a job washing dishes at the Maple Street Diner," Robert said. Victor raised an eyebrow. "And?" Robert's voice softened. "One night, my grandson fainted during his shift because he hadn't eaten all day." Clara listened carefully now. Robert continued. "The diner was closing, and most of the staff had already gone home." Victor shifted his weight. "But one person stayed." Robert looked directly at him. "A waitress named Emily Bennett." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Robert continued speaking. "She didn't know who my grandson was. She had no idea our family had money." Clara leaned forward. "What did she do?" she asked. Robert smiled faintly. "She cooked him a full meal and refused to charge him." Victor remained quiet. "She told him something my grandson never forgot," Robert said. Robert paused. Then he repeated Emily's words slowly. "Everyone deserves kindness when they need it most." The pharmacy fell silent. Victor's confident expression had completely disappeared. Robert continued. "When my grandson tried to repay her later, she refused the money." Victor spoke quietly now. "So what does that have to do with the boy?" Robert looked back toward the street. "That waitress was Emily Bennett." Victor's eyes widened. "And the boy you mocked today?" Robert paused. "Is the son of the woman who once helped my grandson when he had nothing." Victor stood there speechless. Clara covered her mouth in surprise. But Robert wasn't finished yet. Because there was one more part of the story Victor didn't know. And when he heard it, the wealthy businessman who had mocked a poor child only minutes earlier would realize just how badly he had misjudged the situation, and just how much that mistake was about to cost him. Victor Langford stood motionless. For the first time in years, the confident businessman who was used to controlling every room he entered felt completely powerless. He looked toward the door again. But Noah Bennett was already gone, walking home with the medicine his mother desperately needed. Victor cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well," he said slowly, "that's interesting." But Robert Harrison's expression remained serious. "You mocked that boy," Robert said calmly. Victor shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know who he was." Robert raised an eyebrow. "That shouldn't matter." The words landed heavier than Victor expected. Clara quietly continued organizing the counter, though she clearly listened to every word. Victor straightened his jacket. "Look," he said defensively, "I didn't do anything illegal." Robert nodded. "No, but sometimes the worst mistakes people make aren't illegal." Victor frowned. "What do you mean?" Robert stepped closer. "They're simply unkind." Victor opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Robert spoke again. "Do you know what my grandson did after that night at the diner?" Victor shook his head. Robert smiled slightly. He insisted on paying the kindness forward. Victor waited. Robert continued. He created a scholarship program for students in Maplewood whose families are struggling financially. Clara looked impressed. I remember hearing about that, she said. Robert nodded. Yes, hundreds of students have benefited from it. Victor tried to hide his discomfort. That's admirable. Robert studied him carefully. But the most important lesson my grandson learned that night wasn't about charity. Victor crossed his arms. What was it? Robert looked directly into his eyes. That you should never judge someone based on how they look. Victor looked down at the floor. Because he knew exactly what Robert meant. He remembered the way he had laughed. The way he had mocked Noah. The way the boy had lowered his head in embarrassment. And suddenly Victor felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame. Robert turned toward the door. That boy walked into this pharmacy today after 6 months of hard work. Victor listened silently. He saved every dollar he could just to help his mother. Robert paused. And even when he didn't have enough money, he still stopped to help a stranger. Victor exhaled slowly. I didn't know. Robert nodded. Most people don't know someone's story. There was a moment of silence. Then Victor looked toward the street again. Where did he go? He asked. Clara looked through the window. He probably walked home. Victor frowned. Robert watched him carefully. Victor rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I might have been a little harsh. Clara raised an eyebrow. A little. Victor sighed. All right, more than a little. Robert didn't smile, but he did nod slightly. So what are you going to do about it? Victor looked surprised. What do you mean? Robert folded his arms. You can't undo what you said. Victor looked down again. But you can decide what you do next. Victor thought for a moment. Then he looked back toward the street. Do you know where the Bennetts live? He asked. Clara nodded. Small apartment complex on Maple Street. Victor grabbed his car keys from his pocket. Robert watched him carefully. Victor paused near the door. I suppose, Victor said slowly, it's time I go apologize. Robert nodded. That would be a good start. Victor stepped outside. But Robert knew something Victor didn't realize yet. Because what Victor was about to discover when he arrived at Noah's home would change him in ways he never expected. And the moment he knocked on that apartment door would become a story he would remember for the rest of his life. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Victor Langford's black luxury sedan rolled slowly down the quiet neighborhood road. This part of town looked very different from the downtown business district Victor was used to. The buildings were older. The sidewalks were cracked. Small apartment complexes stood close together, their paint slightly faded with time. Victor glanced at the address Clara had written down for him. He finally stopped in front of a modest 2-story building with a small sign that read, Maplewood Apartments. For a moment, Victor just sat in the car. His hands rested on the steering wheel. The events of the past hour replayed in his mind. The boy counting coins. The mocking laughter. The embarrassed silence in the pharmacy. And Robert Harrison's words. You should never judge someone based on how they look. Victor exhaled slowly. Then he stepped out of the car. Across the street, Noah Bennett was climbing the narrow stairs leading to the second floor of the apartment building. Victor called out, Hey kid. Noah turned around. At first, his eyes widened with surprise. Then he immediately looked nervous. Victor walked toward him. For the first time since they had met, the wealthy businessman didn't look intimidating. In fact, he looked unsure. Noah gripped the medicine box tightly. I already paid for it, he said quickly. Victor shook his head. No, that's not why I'm here. Noah didn't say anything. Victor hesitated before speaking again. I came to apologize. Noah blinked. Victor rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I shouldn't have said those things to you back at the pharmacy. The boy studied him carefully. Victor continued. I didn't know your story. Noah shrugged slightly. It's okay. But Victor shook his head. No, it's not. He paused. I judged you without knowing anything about you. Noah looked down at the small white medicine box in his hands. Victor noticed how carefully the boy held it. Is that for your mom? Victor asked. Noah nodded. She's been really sick. Victor glanced toward the apartment building. Can I meet her? Noah hesitated. But something about Victor's tone felt different now. After a moment, he nodded. Okay. They climbed the narrow staircase together. The hallway upstairs was quiet. Noah stopped in front of apartment 2B and opened the door. Inside, the apartment was small but tidy. A worn couch sat against the wall, and a thin blanket covered a woman resting quietly. Emily Bennett slowly sat up when she saw Noah. You're back already? She asked. Then she noticed Victor standing in the doorway. Her expression turned confused. Noah, who is this? Victor stepped forward respectfully. Ms. Bennett, he said. My name is Victor Langford. Emily looked uncertain. I met your son earlier today. Noah walked over and handed her the medicine. Her eyes widened. Noah, how did you get this? The boy smiled. I saved up for it. Emily looked stunned. You did what? Victor watched the moment quietly. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she hugged her son. You shouldn't have done that, she whispered. Noah shrugged. I wanted you to feel better. Victor felt a tight knot form in his chest. For the first time in years, he realized something. This small apartment held more love than many of the luxury homes he had visited. Victor cleared his throat. I actually came here for another reason as well. Emily looked at him. Yes. Victor took a breath. I own Langford Financial. Emily's eyes widened slightly. I've heard of it. Victor nodded. I also run a foundation that helps families facing medical difficulties. Emily looked surprised. Victor continued. I would like to cover all of your medical expenses moving forward. Emily blinked in disbelief. You don't have to do that. Victor shook his head gently. No, I do. He looked toward Noah. Because today your son reminded me of something very important. Emily looked confused. What's that? Victor smiled slightly. That kindness doesn't come from wealth. He paused. It comes from character. Noah stood quietly beside his mother. Victor reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. This is my personal number, he said. If either of you ever need anything, call me. Emily accepted the card slowly. Thank you. Victor nodded respectfully. But before leaving, he looked at Noah one more time. You know something, kid? Noah looked up. Yes. Victor smiled. You're richer than most people I know. Noah didn't fully understand what he meant, but he smiled anyway. Victor walked toward the door. As he stepped outside, the sun was beginning to set over Maplewood. For the first time in a long time, Victor Langford felt like he had learned something that money could never buy. And it all started with a boy who was just $2 short, but had more kindness in his heart than anyone expected. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change the biggest hearts. And that's the end of this incredible story. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video and share it with someone who believes kindness still exists in the world. And let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Victor's place? Don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales for more emotional and inspiring stories that remind us how powerful kindness can truly be. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change someone's life forever.